Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 57, A Carefully Woven Dream. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we are welcoming back guest host James Fox. And together we're going to talk about the 2010 film Inception. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great.
I'm doing great too. I'm ready for this.
Fantastic. I'm also doing great. And before we start talking about Inception, Mike, why don't you tell us what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world, let's see, it's more of the same. I'm still working on sort of business stuff, marketing, promos, things like that. I wasted a lot of time doing updates for the newsletter because of there was a whole change there that had to be done on the back end. So that sucked up a lot of time. Otherwise, yeah, that's it. I have not yet gotten into editing Zara 2 to get it to alpha, so I'm hoping to do that in the coming week. I'll start on that. But otherwise, yeah, just looking at ads and things like that. Nothing too exciting.
And James, what's new in your writing world?
I've got a lot of cool stuff going on, actually. I'm T-minus 2 weeks away from finishing the Soul Saga trilogy, the first trilogy in that world, and it releases with CKP in I think just a little over 2 weeks. So very excited about that. I got a lot of readers that are reaching out that are also excited. So that's really fun. I actually just got to type the end on my next work in progress this morning. So that was very cool. And I'm hoping for maybe a 5-book release year this year. So I'm feeling like I'm back in the saddle. So I'm feeling really good about that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And I am 90% of the way complete with Ecliptic. So I may go over 75,000 words. That's usually my target number, but I think I might go over that because these chapters stuff keeps happening. Every time I think, I think we're done, and then something else happens. And so I have to follow the characters where they're going. And I finished the audiobook editing of the last book in my time travel series, the Temporal Protection Course series. So book 4's audio editing is completed, and those chapters will be released on YouTube for the rest of the month. And then after the chapters have released, a couple weeks after that, I will then compile all of those chapters into one very long audiobook, which will be released on YouTube.
Wow, excellent.
Wow, very cool.
You guys are cranking along.
Everybody, we all doing good work. Of course, James, being the sleepless wonder that he is sets our aspirational goal for us.
Yeah.
Well, like I always say, I don't write good words. I just write lots of them.
And as a reminder, you can read Mike's Tales of Zara on Amazon, both episodically on Kindle Vella as well as in ebook and paperback format. You can read James's books available online through Chris Kennedy Publishing. And you can also read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard as it's being written on Patreon. And all those links will be in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books or movies or television, James?
I honestly have not been doing a lot of consumption of material the last few months, just because I've been in get it done mode. But I did start watching The Gentleman just a couple nights ago on Netflix, and it's a Guy Ritchie series, and oh my god, I I don't think I've ever laughed as hard at dark comedy as I have in this show. Like it's a show that takes itself very seriously, and but then like stuff happens, and you're like, what just happened? And you start cracking up, and then it's like a 3-hit combo punch where it's like first you get shocked, then you get a laugh, and then you get another bigger laugh, and you're like, oh my god, I need to watch that section again because I'm dying. It's really good. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. And how about you, Mike? What have you encountered?
Yeah. First, let me comment on The Gentleman. That sounds great. I definitely have to check that out because I love Guy Ritchie movies. So I actually saw The Gentleman. It's based off of a movie called The Gentleman, right? If I remember right. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. As far as what I've been watching, let's see. I watched the Netflix. I think it's a Netflix, like not miniseries. What do they call it? Short series, something. I think there's 4 episodes of The Signal, which is kind of cool. It's like this story where this woman goes up into space to do scientific research and detects the signal of a voice, but it's coming from space, not from Earth. So then they investigate that and how the different factions are trying to prevent, whatever that is from getting out, things like that. But it's only 4 episodes. It's a pretty quick story, little sci-fi story. Yeah, it's kind of cool. I would check it out. And what have you been watching or reading?
Just Inception in preparation for this podcast. And we're going to actually be talking about the Marvel series Moon Knight in a few weeks. So I started watching that series as well. I forgot how dark that was.
Yeah.
So are we ready to talk about Inception?
Sounds like James is. Let's do this.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Today we're talking about the story told in the 2010 film Inception, and I'm going to read the synopsis that comes up when you type Inception into Google. Dom Cobb is a thief with the rare ability to enter people's dreams and steal their secrets from their subconscious. His skill has made him a hot commodity in the world of corporate espionage, but has also cost him everything he loves. Cobb gets a chance at redemption when he's offered a seemingly impossible task: plant an idea in someone's mind. If he succeeds, it will be the perfect crime, but a dangerous enemy anticipates Cobb's every move. So, James, what do you like about this story?
Okay, so I think Inception. First of all, I love Christopher Nolan. So, if Mr. Nolan, if you hear this, I'll just come serve you coffee all day. If you ever need a hand, I just want to soak up some of your genius. I believe that this is a creative storyteller's flagship show or film or story or whatever. I think that it's about the power of ideas. And if you can't get excited about that, then I don't know what to tell you. And for me personally, as a person who doesn't sleep a lot but gets a lot of inspiration from my dreams, because I don't even dream as myself most of the time. I'm other random people. Sometimes I'm not even in my own dream. I'm just like a camera that's floating around watching other people do stuff. So I draw a lot of my own inspiration and incept my own ideas through dreams. So this film is a very personal one, and really honestly, I'm just a sucker for any film or story that has a guilt and redemption arc for a character, because I have a very guilty conscience. I struggle with guilt a lot. So watching somebody have the similar pains that I do and find a way through them is always very inspiring to me.
And Mike, what do you think? What do you like about this story?
First of all, I'm glad James was able to join us on this one. Sounds like it has a good meaning and impact for him. I also love Christopher Nolan's stories. I think he's brilliant as well. I have to say, this movie brought tears to my eyes as I was watching, like toward the end, just at how brilliantly conceived and executed it was. Just there's so much phenomenal work put into this film that it really blew my mind away when the first time I saw it. I think it's just a fantastic science fiction idea but it's mixed with a deep emotional experience. And that's the best kind of sci-fi, I think. It uses the concept of the story, right? Whatever science fiction idea that the writer's playing with, but it looks at how that impacts society and how that impacts an individual and where that could go. And I think it does it so well. And he gives us the hook of the story first, right? Here's what this is, right? We're going to get you used to it. We're going to start off in someone's dream, and we're going to play with that idea, but that's not really what the story is. It's just a setup for the sort of the structure of what's going to happen and the idea of the sci-fi, but not really the heart of the story. We get that the hero is separated from his children and that his wife is dead, and that's really the point at which we're like, okay, this is what the story's about. So I love that. And he sets it up so well. We get a very clear, want for the character. We understand what his goal is. He wants to get back to be with his children someday. He wants to be able to go home. And he sets that up so wonderfully, and he mixes the concepts throughout the story of here's the dream states that we're playing with, and here's the internal struggle that the main character is going through. And it's like we get a little bit of those back and forth. It's not just one, it's not just other. And there's just so many fun things. Even just the name Ariadne, who's a character who helped Theseus get out of the maze in Greek mythology. It's like obviously like she's sort of the maze builder here in this story. I thought that was a really nice touch. And this is one of those movies where rewatching it reveals how much setup was done early on regarding what is to come later, right? With his wife, that you don't really get the first time through. It's like, okay, there's just stuff happening. You're kind of going along with it. But then when you rewatch it, it's like you see like every little thing that's masterfully foreshadowed for events that occur. It's funny because he's foreshadowing events that actually occur in the past, but get revealed later in the movie. Very cleverly done. Nolan is brilliant at playing with time and intermixing different storylines like that. Yeah, and the stakes keep going up. Things just keep going wrong. It keeps getting worse. You're wondering how they're going to get out of this. And it's just so good. And when we learn, toward the end of the movie that Cobb was the one to basically, cause his wife's death ultimately because he inadvertently did an Inception on her and created that thought that led to her death. It's just heartbreaking. And it's so well revealed. Yeah, I don't know. I loved it. This is one of my favorite movies. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I agree with both of you. I think this movie is brilliant. And I agree that this is one of those movies, one of those stories that is so tight because every single scene, every single piece of dialogue are part of the breadcrumb trail that is being laid that is then in every way paid off at the end. There is nothing left hanging at the end except for the spinning top. Nothing left hanging. Everything is very neat, very tidy, tightly done, and very satisfying when you get to the end. But it also is so, I say this like it's in a box, right? It's neat, it's tidy, it's tight, it's closed, but it's also the most open film ever because it introduces so many concepts that could be expanded forever. Like James said, it's a story about ideas, and ideas can go on forever. So I love how you can see both. It's like the mirror scene in this film where Ariadne closes two mirrors and you can see the reflections forever, but you can also see the individuals. That's what this movie is about, the individuals and the reflections that go on forever. It's absolutely brilliant. What you said about Ariadne and her creating the maze, one of the things that stood out to me was she also is the stand-in for us, for whom the information of the story is laid out so that we, the viewer, can understand what's happening, which then leads to the question. She's creating the framework of the dream, and she's also being having things explained to her about the framework of the dream. How much is she then, as the stand-in for us, controlling what's happening? Because this is a story of perception as well. So I think that is so brilliant to have that role do both things, be the architect of the dream as well as the watcher of the dream. Really brilliant. I also loved how every step of the way we are told what this story is about, but in very subtle ways. Their wake-up call music is No Regrets by Edith Piaf. We get that almost at the get-go, that this story is about regrets. And I also loved how when they decide to take on the challenge of the Inception with Fisher, Cobb says something about wanting to do it through reconciliation and catharsis, which is exactly what he needs and what he gets when he's in the dream with Fisher. So it's just those layers, just like you said, there's all this foreshadowing and all these pieces laid out that are then fulfilled as the movie goes on. I think it's brilliant. And then, of course, there's just the basic storytelling. We've got a heist story where we have a team who each gets to exercise their individual talents in order to problem solve in the middle of their heist, which is something we've talked about before, Mike, that we really like to see. We've got a ticking clock. We've got layers of danger from one level to the next as they go deeper into the dream. But the other thing that I thought was really impressive was that every element of this story is sympathetic. There's really no bad guy. Everything that they do, they're doing for a very sympathetic, understandable reason. It's for really good reasons. And I thought that was really helpful too. We're not actually against anyone in this. So anyway, I could go on for a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that Nolan does really, really well is that he doesn't follow the same rules all the rest of us do. You know, it's like I've been told so many times, especially through school, that like if you don't have a strong antagonist, then you're going to have a weak protagonist, and that's something that Nolan seems to not care about at all. I mean, he makes the environment the bad guy, or he makes the hero both his own antagonist, and I think that is kind of more in line with how we feel as humans. You know, I don't know how many people can say, "Oh yes, there's definitely this one villain that's in my life that's making it terrible for me, and that who I have to overcome." Like most of us are just like we're just trying to get over our own stuff every day.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. I didn't even consider that. Yeah, you're right. There's not really a bad guy, and like James said, it's more Cobb working against himself, right? The story, there's an external struggle of something they're trying to do, but it's not, you know, it's not Ocean's 11 where they're doing it to get back at this guy who wronged somebody, right? They're trying to do it for the betterment of the world in a way. I mean, there might be some selfish motivation there as well, but the antagonist isn't clear cut. It's more of an internal struggle played out through the events that we see in the story. Yeah.
I actually wrote down the only antagonist is failure and regret.
Yeah.
And of course, we have the projections in the dreams, but in a way, the projections are like our own fears. It's what we project into our struggles that are the most dangerous to us.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and Maul could kind of, you know, be that role. But who's Maul in this story? It's really just Cobb's subconscious not wanting to let her go.
Yeah. So is there anything that you might have changed in this story?
The thing that I really liked about my experience with this was a little bit different though. Like I saw it in the theater, on an IMAX screen, you know, a huge theater in San Francisco. I didn't know anything about the story at the time. I was working really hard. I was you know, doing 20-hour work days. My company was really starting to hum along. So I didn't consume any media for a long time, and I think we went as part of a wrap party on a project with my whole film crew, and just kind of took over this theater and watched it. And I hadn't seen any trailers, had no idea what was happening. I just knew everybody else was excited about it, and I was like, fine, whatever. So I went in with zero expectations, and I cried. I'm not ashamed to say that, like, I sobbed through most of this film. Not only is the story just rich and intricate and multi-layered, it's beautifully done. I mean, it's beautifully executed. Like there were shots that were so beautiful that I choked up right there, and like I don't even know what was happening in the moment. I was just like, oh my god, this is some of the most beautiful cinematography I've ever seen and visual effects. So I I think it's almost a master class on storytelling. It's more than just like this is how you tell stories, in a cool way, and execute in storytelling in a very meaningful and impactful way. But it's also like a masterclass on how to break every rule that's written about storytelling. So no, my tip of the cap to Nolan. He nailed it with this one.
And how about you, Mike? Anything you might change?
There was a couple things, or just thoughts I had. The first thing was the totem, and how the totem is individualized to the person, and it helps them distinguish from real life versus the dream world. I didn't really understand how that worked for the other people. Like, I get the top because it's an active thing. You spin the top, and then it's like if you're in the dream, it keeps spinning, and if you're in the real world, obviously it will eventually stop. But the weighted die that I forget the name of his character had. So he goes in the dream. Why wouldn't his subconscious also create a weighted die? Like, why would it be? How would that distinguish the dream world from the reality? I didn't get that, and they didn't really explain it. It was just kind of thrown out there. It's like, oh yeah, I have this thing. Like, okay, but how does that help you? I would have liked to have seen something a little bit more active, or someone else use one of those at some point, so we can see what that is. I mean, that is just such a small note.
Yeah.
I only thought of that after seeing this like 3 or 4 times already. And then the other thing, and I'm sure I'll get pushback on this, and I hope so. I hope you both push back and can talk to me more about this thought. While the spinning top, okay, let's talk about the spinning top for a minute. First of all, I've seen people talk about online about how, oh, it's not his spinning top, it was hers, and it's like, well, he says it was hers, but that doesn't mean he couldn't also use it. I mean, and he does use it. So I think that argument is kind of silly. It's like he's obviously using it throughout the series, or throughout the show. He's literally the only person who we see using their totem. So it's obviously he has adopted it as his own thing now. But anyway, the very ending moment, I'm not sure that cutting on that spinning top at the end serves the story well. I think it's a cute moment, right? It's like when I first saw it, I was like, oh, it kind of blew my mind. Like, is he still in a dream? Is he not still in a dream? I think from a story standpoint, it takes away from what we'll talk about in a minute, which is the theme of the story. I think even the implication that he might still be in a dream sort of belies what we've seen with his character. He's already transformed himself, right? He's accepted his wife's death, and he's ready to move on. And we've seen that, and we've seen another character witness that as well. So it's not just like our perspective of it, like maybe we were fooled. So I feel like, from where we started the story to where we end the story, his character development has gone through the whole process, and he's transformed. And just implying that maybe that didn't happen seems like you're undercutting your story a bit there. Yeah, it doesn't make sense that all of that character growth would be undone by having him choose to stay in the dream, which is what a continuously spinning top would indicate. And if that is the case, it feels cheap to me that if he just got stuck there and he's still dreaming and he died, that's just kind of lame. Like, if that's how the story went, it's like it undoes like all the coolness that came before and the struggle we went through with this character. So I feel like that kind of took away from me on this watch through the whole sort of meaning of the story and the struggle that we went through with him. So that's one thing, and I'd like to hear you guys' opinions on that. My other thought was, I kind of wish the Inception that they had to put on Killian tied into the theme better. And again, this is something I want to hear you guys' opinions about, because maybe I don't have the theme right in my mind. So Let me throw it to you. Is there something that you would improve, and what do you think about those two things?
I would love to jump in on the top because as a filmmaker, I get what he's doing with that, I think that like it again, he's a rule breaker, right? He's totally a maverick. You're not supposed to end. You're supposed to try to wrap up your story and not leave such a huge cliffhanger that people don't know what's going on, right? Like you can tease a little cliffhanger, you can tease a sequel, you can do those types of things with purpose, but you can't just say, well, wait a second, was it real or not? But he did, and he did it with the sole purpose of making the entire internet explode with an argument that will never end about whether or not this is real or not. However, I think that Nolan did it as a metaphor to filmmaking and storytelling. He's having a like meta commentary with us about filmmaking, and just like a dream, right? A film creates simulated reality for us to explore and engage with, and so with that ambiguous ending, he's reminding the audience that what we just watched wasn't true, but it felt true while we were experiencing it. And that's exactly what's happening to the character with the top, and that's why it wobbles a little bit at the end. It's all just this meta, like, haha, I got you at the end, which is great. I mean, I knew exactly what he was doing when I watched it the first time, as I was, snotting into my beard and choking back tears. Yeah. So it's totally just a metaphor for filmmaking and storytelling that what you just watched isn't real, but it's still.
Well, I think that's a very good perspective, James, because I had not considered that, and I actually was agreeing with Mike 100%, because I felt it took away from the satisfaction of the ending to have the reality of it be questioned. But your point is well taken about it taking us out of the story and putting us, essentially waking us up from the story.
Yeah, I mean, it proves itself in that you care enough that if he didn't leave the dream, it ruins the story for you, and if he is out of the dream, then it's great. Like, the fact that you care proves that the top image at the end worked on you because you care.
I can see that. The other thought I had was in the story world, right? Your analysis is kind of meta, James, like looking at it from the outside, from the viewer's perspective, or like you said, from the filmmaking perspective or storytelling perspective. Within the story, I could see his action. I don't have a problem with, right? Cobb spinning it and then walking away and going to see his kids. That felt right to me because he's made peace with his past. He's now moving forward into the future. So him doing it is fine. It's just the cut. that was the thing that was like, okay, it felt gimmicky to me, but I guess with your analysis, I can appreciate it more as sort of a dream within a dream, story within a story kind of thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Again, this is a relatively minor. The whole thing that I'm bringing up here is a relatively minor point for me. I don't even care about the argument so much, whether he's in a dream, whether he's not in a dream. What is he trying to say there? Like, it doesn't really detract from the story. It was just something that I noticed. But I do appreciate your view and your analysis of it. Back to you now.
So I only had one thing that I might have done differently. And it's a small thing that doesn't really take away from the story. But I think I would have eliminated the scene where when he goes to recruit one of the team members and then he ends up in a chase being, hunted down by people trying to kill him. I would have just taken that out. I don't think it added to the story at all. We already had plenty of layers of danger and intrigue for this story. I didn't think that chase scene was necessary. That's it. Small thing.
I would actually agree with that. It kind of is like a weird dip. You kind of, it's like, oh, we need one more action sequence. Let's just, let's do this.
It's funny that you mentioned that, actually, and I didn't think of that, but you're right, because as I was watching, the movie's like, 2.5 hours long or something like that. It's pretty long. and I was trying to fit this into a day, and I didn't have as much time, so I was trying to fast forward through various parts, and I really couldn't. Like you said before, just about everything was necessary, but that scene was the only part where I was able to fast forward a couple of times. So yeah, you're probably right.
So let's talk about the theme of Inception. I think there are several themes in here, and I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on the themes that you drew from this film. Mike, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So here, the way that I tend to look at theme for me, and this isn't my idea. It's just, it's in 2 or 3 books that I've read about writing and about theme. The way I look at it is the theme is a universal statement on the human condition. So I like to present it as like, here's a statement of fact, right? Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. Whether the theme is true or not is irrelevant. That's the theme that's being presented by the writer. You may not agree with it, is what I'm saying, but it's presented as, here's a universal truth. Sort of, this is the thing that underlies the story and what the story is really about. So, all right, with that little preamble there, I actually couldn't fully lock down the theme. I had a couple thoughts that are along the same lines, so I'm very curious to see what you guys think. So the first thing I came up with, and I sort of refined this to be a little bit more general, but the first one I had was, in the wake of tragedy that you feel responsible for, you must forgive yourself in order to move on. I made that a little bit more general to be, sometimes you must let go of the past in order to have a future, or you must come to terms with your past in order to have a fulfilling future, something like that. So it's about like forgiving yourself or coming to terms with the past in order to be able to move on. That's kind of like the message that I got. And for me, what I've seen, the theme is typically manifested the most in sort of that climactic moment. What does the protagonist do in that moment? That kind of shows their transformation of their character and points to the theme. And what we see here is, in the climactic moment, what happens, Cobb is willing to let go of his wife and realize, okay, I got to move on, let the past go, forgive myself for what happened. So that's sort of the culmination of what the story is really about up to that point. Anyway, that was my thought. James, what do you think? First of all, what is your take on theme, and what do you think the theme or themes are in Inception?
Well, I think the pillar theme for the film is one of the nature of reality. I think that it exploring this kind of world of reality versus illusion, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a cool filmmaker film, right? Is it's really like a philosophical exploration about the nature of existence and our perception. I can tell you that I have had dreams. We have enough time for me to tell the story of the dream. Maybe we can do that on another podcast. But the dream happened 20 years ago, and it affects me daily to this day. And it was so real and so poignant that I literally almost fought people about what happened in my dream. So I think fundamentally Inception is about the nature of reality. But I think there's a lot of other themes that they kind of touch on and explore. Obviously we talked about the guilt and redemption theme. I think there's the whole idea of creation or artistry, creativity, the power of ideas. I think that the whole idea of incepting an idea, inserting an idea into somebody's brain and subconscious is kind of central in that as well. So yeah, I think that there's some obvious things that we can compare it to. We talked about the labyrinth, right? There's also the parable of the ship of Theseus, right? Or I guess that's not a parable. That's what is that?
Like a thought experiment.
Yeah. And then there's another one that we talked about a lot in film school that I can't remember now. But these are literal literal like the film is like a literal manifestation of some of those thought experiments or parables or themes, right? I mean, again, Nolan is brilliant at just like taking something that is kind of this like weird philosophical abstract concept and just making it real. It's like I'm not going to try to like hide this in some kind of like, contemporary or like sci-fi future that we understand. Like I'm just literally going to say, no, we're going to go into the brain, into the dream, and we're going to like physically incept the idea in there. It's just really cool. So yeah, as far as themes, I'd say like if I had to put my money on one, I'd say it was nature of reality. And I just as a little aside, I think that we're seeing like kind of an interesting thing in like healing like PTSD and depression and anxiety by like forcing people to have like kind of crazy dreams and using that as a modality for healing. So it's almost kind of a similar thing that's happening in real life medicine based on what happened to Cobb in Inception. So kind of a neat thing.
Well, the theme that I pulled a couple of themes out, as you guys have already talked about, but it's interesting. The one I landed on is actually a combination of the two that you guys both discussed. There's this need to leave the past behind to be able to move forward. But to me, I was looking at the mechanism by which he did that, and I was looking at the same scene that you were, Mike. That last scene when he's talking with Mal down at the bottom level. And for me, the theme that I pulled from that was healing through faith. And by faith, I don't mean like faith with a capital F, but faith with a small f, because she kept trying to convince him that his perception of reality was mutable. It could be changed. And if he could change it, he could stay there with her. And instead, he chose to believe in his perception of reality and chose that perception to move forward with, and then to leave his path behind, his past behind him. So to me, it was about sort of making a stand and having faith in his own perceptions and using that to give him the strength to move forward.
I like it.
Yeah, that's good. I like that too. And that also ties in with the statement that Saito made, right? Something to that effect, like, are you willing to take a leap of faith, or are you gonna die a bitter man with regrets, or something like that?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So as a writer, what do you take away from this story, Mike?
Oh man, like James said, it's sort of a master class. There's so much to take away from it. I'm gonna go with the thing that I think is important to remember, because you can look at this movie as, blockbuster spectacle, fun sci-fi, hopping in dreams and stealing stuff and incepting stuff in dreams. And all that stuff is super cool. And I love the science fiction aspect of it. I think this is one of the great science fiction movies of all time. But for me, it doesn't work as well without the theme, without the character growth and the character struggle that Cobb faces throughout the story, and this horrific thing that happened to him that he completely blames himself for. Without that as the backbone, it's just a cool spectacle movie that I don't think would be as powerful. So for me, my writing takeaway is remember the theme, because this is a story that could have easily gotten lost in the plot and the science fiction idea, but it constantly injected the real story throughout. So remember the theme. That's my writing takeaway.
That's cool. How about you, James? What would you take away as a writer?
I think my principal takeaway is the power of character motivations. I think speaking a little bit to what Mike said is I think the complex plot is awesome, and I think it does a really good job. But what grounds us, like we can totally rationalize away, unobtainium away the science of what's happening because we care about the character as much as we do. It's an emotional journey, and I think the whole film is driven by all of the characters, not just Cobb, but all of the characters' emotional connections and to what they're doing. So, I think that it goes down to something that I try to try to do in all of my works, and that's the engine of the story is the character.
Indeed. And for me, it was this revelatory idea that you don't need to have a hardcore antagonist. You can have everyone's motivations be sympathetic, ones that the consumer of the story can empathize with and support, and still have a complex, nuanced, and resonating story through those sympathetic character motivations.
Oh, that's a good one too. I like that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Inception. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the film Kung Fu Panda. Thank you so much, James, for joining us again. It was a delight to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was a fun one.
Thank you guys too. This was great.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.